Okay, so thank you all for coming. Matt Craig is with us tonight. He is a transformation leader who loves helping organizations cultivate conditions for their most important outcomes. He has served in volunteer leadership positions within the Pittsburgh PMI chapter, and he currently serves as the founder of the Pittsburgh Change Management Professionals. And so welcome, Matt.
Thank you very much, Deb. I appreciate it. I will go ahead and turn on my share and hopefully it's behaving for us. And then my first order of business is actually going to throw to my colleague, Conrad, one of the other founders of our little gang, and ask Conrad to talk to us a little bit about Pittsburgh Change Management Professionals Group, and then we'll get started with our actual session. So with that, if you guys could just confirm for me that you are seeing the screen, my screen.
Yep.
Cool. Right, I'll go forward one slide and go to Conrad. Conrad, it's all yours.
All right, thanks, Matt. Yeah, my name's Conrad Yerster, and you wouldn't think with this accent, I'm a Yinzer really. I live in Pittsburgh now, but part of the Pittsburgh Change Management Professionals, so the PIT CMP, PIT Change Management Professionals.org is our website. But fairly new organization, as you know, Matt, I must quite say defected, but came over and helped us set up the Change Management Professionals group here in Pittsburgh of like-minded people. Obviously, it's a fairly new, I can't say new profession, but clearly up and coming, not quite like the PMP world. We've set this up as a not-for-profit group, and we are wanting to get people to join. We've had a great couple of events over the last couple of years, almost every month. We've had mostly remote, useful, informative sessions. But you can see there from, I won't read all the points, but have a blast. I mean, what could go wrong with an Aussie and a South African and a bunch of Americans, right? But we obviously share best practices.
Question, Conrad.
Yeah, so I had to throw that in. But share best practices on change management, organizational change management, and culture, actually practices that work. Obviously, it's going to be really informative tonight with Matt and the crossover between the two, because I think they very closely play together or need to play together in this new world. But we want to build a network, connect with communities like PMP, because I think more and more what we're seeing is clearly a good consultant, whether that has good project management skills, change management skills. Obviously, you combine those, makes a much better consultant, overall. But we're here to discover and learn in these events that we've had. So on the next slide, you can either go to the website and you can join up on that link. Is the pitcmp.org. We'd love to have you. It's free to join at the moment. We do have a LinkedIn group as well that you can see on the right-hand side there. And just finally to say that we are looking to, if you don't know about the certifications generally, we're looking to try and become an official chapter of ACMP, which I'm sure a lot of you may have heard about, the Association for Change Management Professionals. They have their own accreditation certification process, I guess, the PMI piece, PMP, as well as they also offer good discounts and rates as well for, if you've probably heard of ProSire AdCar, that obviously seems to be also really well known. They've done a great job at advertising their whole methodology and becoming more and more important. So we'd love you to join up. As I said, free. As long as you join up on the website for the mailing list, we can let you know when events are on. And we put this sort of type of thing on where we get together. We've had a couple of events. One was a picnic in North Park, get together through the whole COVID thing. So it was great to actually spend some time in person. And final point really, I guess, is it's my last day. I work at CGI, but it's actually my last day today at CGI. But I think one of the most important things we've seen, actually, we do a voice of the clients survey, which they assess. I don't know if you know CGI, 80,000, 85,000 people worldwide, but we poll top C-suite across the world to look at industry trends. And in 2021, this new trend that popped to number 2 across the board. The top industry trend is culture and change management. This is seen as like one of the top things. So clearly an up and coming skill set, a certification, all those sort of things. So we'd love you to join us and to grow the group. So Over to you, Matt.
Excellent. Thank you, Conrad. And I just put a quick prompt in the chat window. I find when I do sessions like this that I really appreciate everyone chipping in with thoughts. Just say good day. That's a good start. And, you know, as we go through the session, I may hopefully think of a couple of prompts or questions that I'd love you guys to answer. So please warm up your chat window, just pop it open and say hello. That's all you need to do. Oh, even from where? Hollidaysburg, out east, I guess. I'm trying to think now where Hollidaysburg is compared to Punxsutawney. I did take my boys out there last week.
Hollidaysburg is a lot further east. It's near Altoona.
Oh, okay. Well, so I was near Punxsutawney. That was not, so I actually went through Altoona as well, but for my own reasons. Yeah, saw Punxsutawney Phil last week, and we got 6 more weeks of winter. So I just wanted to pop up a couple of ground rules as well. So definitely be an active participant. So thank you everyone for popping into the chat window. Oh, State College as well. Awesome. Please do use your mute on your side so that we, as I should now when my phone starts ringing, so that we don't have to worry about muting everyone. You know, we'd obviously just like everyone to be able to chip in. I do love hearing questions as we go. If you've got something to say or got something to ask, just jump in either with the chat window or just directly. And of course, as Deb said, the recording is going to be available for people when we are done. So I just want to restate for you the objectives we have for this session. I try to keep myself in line with what we published. So the first thing we're going to do is just talk a little bit about why are we talking about this topic of organizational change management and project management. I'm going to gently weave in a little bit of program and portfolio management perspective as well, but mostly we'll probably talk about project management and its variants. We'll talk a little bit about some of the characteristics of organizational change management, just to put a little bit of structure to it. But not a huge amount, actually. We're going to talk about the relationship to PPM and sort of how that contributes to value realization, the two of them together. And we're going to talk about actually helping you to improve your project or program or portfolio management effectiveness within your organization through the application of organizational change management. And the other thing, and you'll see this as a big overriding theme throughout this session, is really what I look at as a systems view of organizational performance. And how the techniques of project management can go hand in hand with the techniques of organizational change management to help drive systemic change while being very mindful of the characteristics of the system of an organization. It's actually one of the things I think is a key failure mode, is trying to do sort of single point initiatives that improve one aspect of the overall system of any organization, and then kind of scratch your head and say, why didn't that work? And the reason it didn't work is you didn't address all the other characteristics of the system. And therefore the system reverted itself back to its prior state pretty naturally. That's how systems work. So with that, good. Thank you for all your hellos. Little bit of a first statement about why. Why do we care? Right. So I always want to make sure we ground these discussions on the ability for us to help our organizations create more value. And you could possibly say, why do we care about creating more value? Can't we just do our work well and be happy with that? And so my hope here is to share with you at least my view of why you can't just rest on your laurels, as it were. If you think about this characteristic, if you look at the little chart I have here, I'll even try and use the laser pointer. On the left-hand side, we've got kind of nominally a sense of the performance of any business, BAU, business as usual performance. And that's essentially meeting most of the time the expectations of your customers. And over time, even you can see here, this gray line is somewhat going up. There's naturally, typically some kind of improvement in organization. You almost can't help yourself, or at least hopefully that's the case. However, what's pretty often happening is customer expectations will often outpace regular kind of ad hoc improvement in any organization. And so you need to be thoughtful and you need to be strategic and intentional about the ways that you drive improvement. And usually improvement is expressed through this combination of portfolio management, program management, and project management. Now, there are other things, and we'll see this shortly, that do come into play to help drive organizational performance and improvement. But of course, using organizational change management as the means to influence people to adopt those changes, to adopt those improvements, and to take it on and to create a new normal is really what you're trying to achieve. And so that's the promise here of this sort of green area that you may do a little and maybe stay in pace with customers' expectations. You may do a lot. You may actually be a market leader. You may actually dominate your industry, or at least parts of your organization, perhaps, if you can be more intentionally strategic and drive better change, right? And again, you can think, what are we talking about? Doing new things. Sometimes that's what you want to do. Often you want to just do what you're doing, but better. And sometimes you want to stop doing non-helpful activities, or providing non-helpful services or operational work. And then, of course, this comes down to a key question that relates to organizational change management, which is going to be asked of you as either a project manager or as a change manager, which is those people who are in the trenches, what I'll just call the practitioners, are going to say, what do I have to do as an individual? What do I have to do differently? And helping them, usually it's helping them come to the answer for that question. Usually you telling them is not as helpful as them defining the answer for themselves, but you will help provide the framing for them. Okay. So this next slide, I'll admit, it's to me a little bit of a throwaway, but I took this from the one you're going to see afterwards, which is this intersection of project management and program management and portfolio management. That's sort of what I think of as sort of the major arm of strategic execution. We have various strategic initiatives and priorities, and through these abilities of managing portfolios and programs and projects, we seek to execute and deliver on those strategic objectives. However, if that's all we do, if we do more what, in ProScience language would be called sort of the technical side, and we fail to address the human side, then we are typically left very short of achieving the desired objectives. We are falling short of people actually embracing and adopting the new way of doing things, the new service, the new product, whatever it may be. So hence, we have this intersection of organizational change management, and together we should achieve our intended value realization. Now, as I said, this slide is really a very simplified version of one that I've used for a number of years. And it actually came from some responsibilities I had a number of years ago to help look at the domain of essentially organizational agility and improvement, and think about what are some of the approaches, or if you will, tools that we can apply to any organization to help them improve. To essentially, and I've got this fairly wordy objective statement in the middle here of we want to help organizations adaptively, right, so learn and do and overcome, to adaptively increase their value creation capability. So essentially the health and fitness of the organization and the ability of that organization to deliver to the needs and expectations of its customers. And so you can see that we had a number of things in here. We had service management, we had process improvement, we had technology enablement, automation, we had OCM, we have techniques from Agile, value management. I'm not asking you to worry too much about this slide. All I'm saying is that I cleaned out a lot of that sort of ideally mentally, but I share it with you here because this is going to resonate, I hope, with this characteristic of when you're trying to drive any kind of major systemic improvement, and that's been a lot of my world for a number of years, which is not just single point, hey, we need to take widget A and make it widget A, version 2. It's usually more systemic organizational change that I've been involved with, and it's been necessary to be able to come to grips with these different tool sets and therefore look at organizational function and performance from those different perspectives and apply those tools to drive change that sticks. Okay. So the last thing I'm going to say is sort of all of this level setting is we've talked about how do we discover the value at the intersection of these two domains of basically project management and organizational change management. So let's be clear on what we mean by value realization. So another slide from some of my value management world is what are we talking about? And again, it's important. This is another kind of, if you will, a different type of a system view that when you talk to someone about achieving business value or achieving value from something, it's important to consider what level are you talking about. If you're talking to a CEO or a chief operations officer or someone else who's really in the C-suite, particularly for a global enterprise who may have multiple businesses, they're going to be thinking of value in these terms. They're going to be thinking, what does it mean for us to improve our ability to win in the marketplace? What does success for our business, for our enterprise look like? And then that ideally should be decomposed into these other levels. In what way should we manage our portfolio of investments of business services and capabilities and products to create better performance outcomes that serve the needs of our market or markets? And then under that, of course, we have various projects or services or teams that are going to need to execute according to some of these outcomes and objectives. And then under that, you have the individual stakeholders. Now, a lot of what you'll find in the world of organizational change management, as Conrad mentioned earlier, the realm of culture is a really important one. It's a key determinant of success. It's an enabling characteristic. But a lot of the language of OCM is typically found at these lower two levels. At least I've found that to be true. So we talk a lot about stakeholders. We talk about stakeholder identification, mapping, management, influence, communications, all those kinds of things. And we may also talk about, this level of influence on projects or influence on services or operations or teams. Sometimes we may get to the other two levels, but I personally have found it really useful to make sure that all of this is at least available as a point of reference, so that when you are talking about driving change, certainly number one, you can put it in the terms of the customer and understand how that kind of terms of the customer relates to either enterprise or business success. Right? Are you trying to bring a new, better product to the market? Are you trying to create the same product cheaper? Whatever those characteristics are, what impact does it have on the business? What impact does it have on the customer? And go from there. Okay. So I'm going to pause. That was just a little bit of me setting the stage, if you will, to talk a little bit about the relationship between these two domains, to paint a slightly bigger picture and to sort of bring into hopefully some clearer focus what we mean by achieving value and thinking of these perspectives. So I am seeing a question from Brandon. Do you dollarize it to measure increase in enterprise value? It's a great question, Brandon, and it's a very, I was going to say, I often hear that question. In theory, yes. However, I'll admit to being somewhat of an adherent to things like the triple bottom line or other characteristics of organizational performance, because found over the years is those companies or leaders who seek to only dollarize anything tend to maybe not pay enough attention to the human side of the equation, and so, or perhaps to the environmental side or the community or other characteristics. So an organization itself, my definition, which I've inherited from somewhere, is it's an entity. An organization is an entity that is able to deliver something of value to customers, right? And customers then pay that organization for that exchange of value. They appreciate the value they get, whether it's you get a car or you have electricity to your house or whatever the service or product is. And so it's that exchange of value, that very human-centric experience of benefit that's important. So yes, you could try to dollarize, and sometimes that's useful to think about prioritization. But even that question of dollarization would also bring in questions of when. Do I need to make money today or this quarter, or do I need to save money, or am I looking 5 years down the track? So I don't want to go too deep into the realm of value management. It's a huge and fascinating topic, and it's a really important one. And certainly, I think I have in here somewhere, I hope I do, one of the really important characteristics of effective change management is what measures are we using to clarify and quantify the nature of the change and whether we can see that it's occurred or not. And sometimes that means you need to bring financial metrics into the equation. Sometimes it means you are only looking at human metrics like adoption and satisfaction and the experience and things like that. So thank you for the question. All right, and please, I will try and keep an eye on the chat, keep the questions coming. So I'm going to move on and now just talk a little bit of a comparison between project management and change management. So I have gone to the source for these two. So hopefully you're all familiar, my old PMI crowd, with the newly evolved PMBOK guide. And I don't know if you guys have had a review session on the new 7th edition yet, but I found it fascinating to review in the sense that the PMBOK guide over the years, God, I got my PMP back in 2004, has been getting thicker and thicker. And the new 7th edition is much thinner. And they've really gone back to the core principles of what is project management, what's it what's it supposed to achieve, and what are the principles we're supposed to adhere to in order to make it successful. And so my understanding there is, we can still rely on 6th edition kind of tools and techniques and the big thick stuff around, specific practices and deliverables. But the 7th edition is really trying to bring it back to, if you will, basics about values and principles that'll help people understand why we do what we do in terms of managing projects. And then the other guide that I have here, the sort of the image is the 1st edition of the Standard for Change Management, published by the organization that Conrad mentioned earlier as well, the Association of Change Management Professionals. And again, just another call out to what Conrad said about ARM membership. We've been running for a little under 2 years, very volunteer based, completely free to join up. And we're simply doing this because we believe in the value of people becoming better at managing change within their organizations, and particularly that people side of it, and doing that in concert with other techniques such as agile or traditional project management or whatever you will. So, take that for what it's worth. I see them very much as synergistic, and I'll show you a couple of illustrations of that a little bit later as well. So let's look at the definitions, and you'll see, as I have in the title here, right, there's significant common ground. So out of the new PMBOK, or at least the Standard for Project Management, because they're combined in the book, is this project management, right? The application of knowledge, skills, tools, techniques to project activities to meet project requirements. And then therefore to deliver the intended outcomes. So that's broad. And often one of the challenges with actually good project management is getting clear on what those intended outcomes are, as opposed to, say, widget delivery or widget production. And then, this achievement of outcomes using a broad range of approaches. So one way you could potentially think about organizational change management is it could be validly considered a subset of effective project management, right? Because in order to achieve those intended outcomes, if one of your outcomes is we are operating in a new way, we have taken on a new SAP system, for instance, then the installation of that system technically will not be success, right? You want everyone in the organization who's supposed to touch that system to be able to use it effectively, and ideally to be able to do their jobs better. And that requires organizational change management for that to work. But you can see, again, the definition is very similar, right? So on OCM, this practice of applying a structured approach. So, and there are many structured approaches, but for anyone who's sort of a process management adherent, would say that if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, then you don't know what you're doing. So while there may be many people, and I count myself one of them, advocates of agile technique and learning through doing and adaptation and change, even so, having a known way to do that work that you can repeat, that you can teach to others, and that you can then also improve is a really important characteristic. So I think that language of a structured approach is pretty important to keep in mind. But again, we're moving from a current state to a future state, so very generic, to achieve expected benefits. So you could almost argue, and as I was looking at these, and this is from Standard, that there's not a great deal of difference between the two. Now, when you look to ProSci, again, as Conrad mentioned, a very influential organization and have been around for years, they really focus on this leading the people side of change to achieve the desired outcome. And in fact, a few months ago, I was on a ProSci webinar, and one of the questions they addressed was they have challenges sometimes from maybe a senior manager or someone that says, why would I invest? Why would I bother with organizational change management? And the answer they had, and I thought it was a helpful one, was what is the relative value of everything you're trying to achieve for your initiative, your project or program or portfolio? What is the relative value and impact of people moving into that new state, taking on new habits and behaviors, new knowledge, new understanding, new technique, they've adopted better process, whatever the people side is? And if the answer is essentially zero, I think one of their examples was like if you invest in brand new offsite infrastructure, say, the cloud or something like that. And it's like, well, the administration of that infrastructure, maybe it's not your people anymore. It's like, maybe there's not a whole lot of OCM involved with that. You probably could argue that the people who are at the interface of that infrastructure probably do need some change management. But in almost all cases that I've experienced, the people side of the change is one of the most important and one of the ones that's often left too little too late. And therefore the value realization is significantly diminished, if at all. Okay. So that kind of moves me on to the next point, which is like, why do we bother? Why do we care about change management? And you can skim through these. I hate to read out too much text on the slides, but things like, organizational readiness, flexibility, adaptability, all of these you can see are resonating with the people in, and again, a lot of this context that I'm providing in terms of like, what are we talking about here, is usually about initiatives that are internal to an organization, often, again, in my experience, to improve the organization's performance in some way that then has a knock-on effect to improve the organization's performance in the marketplace. Now, we'll talk a little bit about more of some of these other things here too, like the depth of performance and productivity to decline during change. That is a given. You change something, you're going to be not as good as you were for a little while. I mentioned my daughter's actually at a diving meet right now, and they switched up at the beginning of the season, or before the season, their launching technique, and her dives were not as good for a few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, I don't know, some period of time. And that was frustrating to her because what she used to be able to do well, she couldn't. But then she got past it, and this new technique was enabling her to do bigger and harder dives. But she had to get through that trough of worse performance. And that's true for any kind of change that you introduce to an organization. Okay. So we've talked a little about some of the benefits. We've talked about this relationship. I'm going to go on and provide a nice, simple view of some of the major phases of organizational change management, and we can talk a little bit about how they're distinct from the typical phases of project management. And I realize, again, that talking in terms of phases is perhaps considered old school waterfall, but even within an agile or iterative or adaptive approach, you are still going to have ways of thinking and sort of preparedness, execution, and review that are true, regardless of your actual approach and the duration of those phases. So keep that in mind. Before I jump over to the next slide, though, if anyone wants to pop in any more questions or speak up. I'll keep rolling. So this is a bit of a, I tried to balance this slide, so not too much information, but enough to sort of give you something to chew on. Essentially, one of the ways we're looking at this sort of these phases of organizational change management is whatever it is you're trying to do, whether you think of it from the lens of a project manager or you think of it from the lens of an organizational change management person, you really should essentially do your homework, be prepared, and do the initiation work. Now, again, from what I've seen, oftentimes that is rapidly skipped by because a lot of leaders and a lot of teams, a lot of people want to just get on with movement. They want to see action. They want to see results. They want to see progress towards the new way, in the hope that that new way is going to solve some of their frustration or challenges or pain. So this initial piece of initiation, and particularly here, what is the change? What is the need for change? So we talked a little earlier about things like those perspectives on value realization. What's the expectation there? What kind of impact are we thinking we're probably going to have on people or on the organization or on our suppliers or whomever it might be, right? So that sense of what does that look like, and running an assessment, asking questions, interviews, doing those kinds of things help a lot with providing clarity of the current state before you get moving with you. Does someone have a question? Yeah, I don't know, Deb, if you want to do a blanket mute and we can then unmute ourselves, that might help if you can do it. I don't know if you can.
I'm on it.
Thank you.
Yep.
So who's the change team? And we'll see actually on the next slide, the critical importance of an effective change team. So that really is important. Having an effective change team, having an effective change sponsor can be make or break factors for success. And again, those of us from the project management world know how critical that is. If you have an unskilled, unexperienced team and a kind of calling it in from the sideline sponsor, you're going to struggle, right? So that identification of who's on the team, why are they on the team, and gaining the commitment of the team is pretty important. And then this topic of identifying the system factors that will enable or prevent change. That alone would easily be a talk. And we'll talk a bit more about that as I get to sort of some of those. You saw some of the ones around different techniques that you can use to understand and influence organizational performance. So things like looking at it from a process lens, or looking at it from a project lens, or a people lens, or from a, from Agile, if you will. But those are sort of more tool perspectives, or like coming at it from like, I have these tools, what should I do? Another way of looking at it is kind of the intrinsic structure of how an organization runs and how it performs and how people operate within it. And recognizing that those different characteristics of an organization will either enable or inhibit your attempts at changing it. Okay. So once you've gotten that clear picture of what do we look like, you can then move on into planning the change itself. And a lot of that, again, is I would imagine for any of you with your PMP, this is pretty familiar territory. What is the vision for the change? It should be meaningful. It should ideally be inspiring. The great changes I've been involved with and have proud to be involved with are the ones that have made a true meaningful difference for people, either the people within an organization and or the people who that organization serves, right? If you can articulate that and encapsulate that within your vision of the future, if you can demonstrate why this is important, you can overcome many of the barriers. You then want to understand, like, what are your stakeholders doing? Who are your stakeholders, right? So stakeholder mapping itself is a critical tool. And then what does your change strategy look like? How are you going to approach change? What kind of change plan we have? What does that involve in terms of communications or stakeholder engagement, or running sessions to gather input, or perhaps doing process mapping? And a lot of this, some of these things around the change plan are obviously going to overlap or could be considered to be characteristics of a project management or program management plan, right? But then as you execute, and this is where we really start getting into a loop of plan execution reinforcement, as well as sort of measurement and retrospection, is get on with communicating, right? You want to get moving, and you want people to see that you are actively moving towards this new future state and that they're part of it. That's another really important piece, is it's not just communication out all the time. Your communication really should be very intentionally bi-directional as often as it possibly can be. So whether that's using, say, an internal community or community of excellence, or some other kind of internal collaboration system, that can be very powerful. Hosting lunch and learns, hosting workshops, hosting focus group sessions, doing surveys, et cetera, et cetera. So let people know what you're up to and why you're up to it and what their role is in it, and get them to be involved with you as well, and continually seek feedback all the way through, right? We talked, for those of you who are interested, quite a bit about resistance and change management in our November session last year. That is available on the pitcmp.org site if you'd like to go see the recording. And it was very interesting. And one of the things about identifying and managing resistance, and I'm going to talk about that again in a little bit, is that often people are resisting for reasonable reasons. Usually people are not disgruntled saboteurs of an organization. They're not trying to resist, but it's sensible for them to resist for different reasons. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Definitely producing quick wins is important. Cotter talked a lot about that in leading change. You want people to see that things are working. And in fact, I'm going to talk about that a little bit shortly here too. And of course, sustaining the momentum. And this is really critical. This topic of reinforcement is key. Old habits die hard, as they say. So the ability for you, and again, talking here about system factors, the ability for you to influence the system within which people operate and work and interact is probably one of the most important determinants of where the change is actually going to hold. That and leadership commitment is probably the other one I would mention. So continuing to integrate, I've never found it to be effective. Try and do a wholesale change of everything at once. You're usually doing something different, and then you're doing something else different, and you're doing something else different, and you're locking in those changes and getting feedback on the effectiveness of those changes. That's another really critical characteristic, and continuing to learn and move forward. Actually, on that note, the other thing I'll mention, it's just a bit of an aside. I don't have a slide on this topic, but I think one of the challenges of change management as a domain is this sense of when are we going to be finished with these changes? And one of the ways I like to think about it, and I talk to company leaders along these lines, is you shouldn't feel that you're doing a whole bunch of changes and forcing change and making people put up with change and tolerate change all the time, right? That shouldn't be the mindset. I prefer to think of it much more as you are creating a fit and healthy organization, and ongoing learning and adaptation and growth. And if you think of it, training in the sense of like a football team is training all the time when they're in season, right? They don't just train a little bit off season and then get in and start playing games. So for an organization that's actively serving customers, that's running operations, that's doing all the various things that organizations do, that mindset of continual learning and growth and development of fitness and capability, that naturally embraces organizational change management as a natural characteristic of a habit that you have, as opposed to a burden to tolerate for a limited period of time. Because the best organizations don't look at it that way. They look at it as we are always changing and evolving. We are always getting stronger and fitter. We're adapting to marketplace needs. We're innovating and so on. Okay, so that was just a quick look at some of the sort of major phases and characteristics and a mention of some of the tools of OCM. So I'm going to take a breath, have a sip of water. Any questions? I've got to figure out how I can see my gallery view. I've got my iPad here, but my gallery view is not behaving. Rob is looking very thoughtful, so I get that, Rob. Thank you.
I've been watching the chat. I don't see any questions, but
right,
if anybody has them,
I'm trying to skim through. No one. See, this is one of those sessions like no one's on video. I understand. I'm rarely on video for sessions like this myself. It is really nice when people are on, because then they can kind of give me some at least body language feedback of some sort. All right, I'll keep moving. So one of these things, thank you.
Oh, wait, thank you, Samantha. And we do actually have a question now.
Yeah, I see those. Yeah, thanks, Samantha. And thanks, Ed. Actions. How do they tolerate constant change? So Ed, that question to me resonates with what I was trying to say, which is, I think it's more of a mindset than what's the word, an ability to develop tolerance. Certainly there is a term called change fatigue, where too much change, like all the time, over time, will fatigue people when, for instance, that level of constant change and ambiguity and uncertainty is disrupting people's ability to feel confident in their ability to work well and to be productive and to be effective team members and to just enjoy their work. So in that sense, if you are in an organization that is so much in what I might call change turmoil, then that's not healthy. And that's very different than having the ability as an organization to actively seek and embrace constant evolution, learning, growth, and fitness, but doing it in a way, like, again, if you to use the sports team analogy, you don't go in and work, have a full body workout every day, twice a day before games. It's just that would be overtraining. So yes, you could have overchanging in much the same way. However, I do think that mental shift of in many organizations, it's this change, that change, this change, that change, all these changes, and people feel overwhelmed, which is very different than we are an organization that seeks to continually improve itself. Examples that come to mind, Toyota is a classic. I actually have a book here. I'll pull it out because I love referring to things. This book called Toyota Kata talks about this, basically 2 kata, or sort of repetitive motions, if you will, if anyone's done martial arts, that exist at Toyota. One of them is a kata, a habit of continual improvement for everyone, right? How do I learn how to continually improve my space as a practitioner, whomever I am? And the other habit, the other kata, so of the 2, is how do leaders and managers teach people the first kata? And that's it. And that to me is an encapsulation of the mindset that exists at Toyota that helps them manage organizational change of whatever nature they have, because it's built into how they work. Thanks, Samantha. Yeah, I know where most of my books are most of the time, unless I lend them and then I forget. So let's talk a little bit about, and Ed, did that answer your question? So yes, maybe some stamina, sure. I mean, if you're certainly an organization that's like, doesn't do much change at all, it's very stiff and very static, rigid, and you start trying to throw a lot of change in there, it won't work. That's one thing. So, and probably to Conrad's point, you may need to address some of the cultural factors and particularly leadership. And there's a lot of burdens are placed on leaders' shoulders to drive change, but for good reason, because everyone else in the organization is looking to see, is this a real thing? And in fact, that's a good segue perhaps to this slide here. So this is another very simple.
Yeah, maybe just adding that a little bit to that. Well, if you always are doing like ADKAR, the first piece, the awareness and desire of each change, right? That obviously also helps. So if you just, all this stuff is always going on, if people are aware of the change and why it's happening and the desire why they should make that and to support the change, then I think that obviously helps somewhat in not just jumping to the, all the training and everything else about the change, rather than making sure you do those first two steps. Yeah, and then also having a, as you said, the cultural piece, and not an environment of punishment when you get things wrong.
Right. Oh,
yeah, people feel like they can get things wrong and experiment, and that safety and belonging piece, then people might be more constructive culture, more collaborative, more creative, more happy to try new things.
Definitely. You're lining yourself up for the next talk, Conrad.
Right.
All right, awesome. So I can weave those into what we see here as well. This is a model. It's called the DICE model. If you didn't already figure out the acronym at the top there, this model was developed by an organization called Boston Consulting Group quite a number of years ago, maybe even 20 years ago. It's been a while. And I had the pleasure of working with some of the BCG people over the years, actually more in the realm of value management. But I was introduced to this, and I've always found it to be a useful little construct to keep in mind. So they developed this through a significant amount of research into their work to help organizations transform. So serious organizational transformation. And what they did is they did a lot of serious modeling and statistical analysis and review of factors of like what helps transformations work or fail. And they ended up basically boiling it down to these 4 things, or 5 things really, and they made this acronym, DICE. And so I'm going to just explain them to you in brief, and then if you're interested, I'd recommend go look it up. They have some interesting videos on it, and you can, I think, even do a bit of a self-assessment as to where you stand on these factors for a change that you might be involved with, and it could be eye-opening. So first thing is duration, right? So, and it's not just how long, how big is this change effort or this transformation, this work that we're doing? Is this 2 years or 6 months or 5 years? They found that the actual duration of the total effort was not the determinant. It was the duration of time between serious reviews, like, are we truly on track? Are we truly likely to achieve the intended outcome and benefits? Are people on board? Those kinds of things. So if you're having effectively structured reviews of your transformation and that learning is taken to heart and used, then you can, and their recommendation is like no more than about 2 months, 8 weeks or so between those review periods, then that is a high determinant of success, or one of them. The next is the integrity of the team. And what they mean there is the change team, the transformation team. Do you have a group of skilled and motivated people who are effective at leading and guiding change? And again, particularly for transformative work in organizations of hundreds or tens of thousands of people at least, then that team integrity is critical. The next is commitment of both the executives, not all executives, but the ones most involved with the initiative, right? Maybe if you're improving your financial processes, then the CFO had better be fully bought in and an active and engaged sponsor. Because if they're not, that's trouble. Again, we talked about sponsorship a bit earlier. But the other, of course, is the commitment of your practitioners. So again, if we use the finance example, your various finance professionals throughout the organization, if they're treating this as a side of the desk kind of initiative, then it's going to struggle, right? So you have to figure out how to bring them in, give them a sense of ownership, make sure they're actively involved, make sure that they're being heard, and make sure that they have high commitment. And then the last thing is the effort of those same practitioners. Is this a significant lift for them, right? Do they have to work till midnight every night to tolerate or implement the change? And if so, you're likely to fail, right? If it's a small incremental difference to them, maybe it's an extra couple of hours a week, then that can be absorbed into their workday. And if it is compelling, kind of as Conrad was saying, and there's a meaningful reason and it's inspiring to them, then they'll tolerate that extra effort, at least for some period of time. Okay, so that's the DICE model. As I said, I recommend go have a look. It's a useful tool to review. And again, you can do a quick self assessment. I think at least there used to be a little tool they had online for that. So one of the things I want to do is share with you what I at least find an interesting story about what's required for effective transformation. And what I've seen over the years is that to truly change, right, for an organization, if you will, to change its ways, takes a lot more than one would think. Takes a lot more effort, energy, attention, focus, and time than you would think. So I'm going to share with you an analogy, and I hope it works. So I think 7 years ago now, we did a tour of a place called Beechwood Farms and learned that we could tap our own maple trees and make maple syrup. And we have, I don't know, half a dozen maple trees around our house. And so that year, 7 years ago now, we started making maple syrup. Now, why do I share this story with you? Well, because of this interesting characteristic of what it takes to make syrup. You're transforming tree sap, which looks like water and tastes like water. You would be hard pressed to tell the difference, and converting that into this nice tasty syrup that we like putting on pancakes and waffles. So a couple of factoids, right? So first thing, maple syrup is essentially sugar and water and bits and pieces. And you know that it's ready when it's syrup, when you just boil it forever. When it reaches about this temperature, about 219 degrees Fahrenheit or about 104 Celsius. I find thinking in Celsius easier for this example, so hopefully you can bear with me. And this is where I'm going to look for the chat to jump in with some answers. Okay, so let's say I've put my sap on the stove and I've put it on kind of maybe a low heat, because taking an hour would be a while, but still, often when I collect the sap, it's very cold, it's close to freezing. So let's just assume, for argument's sake, it's at 0 degrees Celsius, right? It's close to frozen, okay? I need to heat it to boiling, and then I need to boil off the rest of the water to get the syrup. So I want to move from 0 degrees Celsius to 104 degrees Celsius. In an hour, I'm at 52. I'm halfway there, okay? How long is it going to take? Oh, Team Kelvin. I'm not doing Kelvin. How long is it going to take until we get syrup, right? And I'll tell you why the answer is the answer. Okay, so is it an hour, right? We're halfway, we're at 52 degrees. When will we start boiling, right? And then when will we have syrup? Yes, keep throwing in your thoughts, right? An hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 12 hours, 20 hours. Like what do you think? Conrad's going for 20. Conrad has not visited me when I've been making maple syrup. But you can imagine, right? Let's start this in the morning. Am I going to be here till the next morning? It depends. Karen, I'd be interested to hear. I'm assuming the same energy input, okay? And again, the point of this story, the reason for me sharing this with you is I found it to be surprising and interesting. And I think it relates very strongly to change management, because I think what happens in a lot of change efforts is similar to halfway to boiling or even getting to boiling. Oh, yay, we've made good progress. It can't be much longer. The answer is, oh, it does depend on humidity. Fair enough. I'm going to assume same conditions all the way. The important thing is, though, it actually takes like, oh, did I put this here? No, I did this build. No, I don't think I put the answer. I'm going to just I didn't do the answer. Okay, the answer is 12 hours, right? The answer is the amount of, and this is, I'll tell you why. And again, it relates to change management and organizational transformation. Here's what's going on. You can get that sap, essentially water, boiling quickly, fairly quickly, right? The amount of energy, let's say it's 1 unit of energy to get it to boil. To get rid of all that water, to convert all that water to steam, so you've left with essentially maple syrup, it's a 1:40 ratio. You need to get rid of 39 parts of water, right? Hence the picture down here. My 5-gallon bucket, right? 640 ounces, I think, of sap will give me 2 8-ounce jars of syrup. So you're getting rid of a lot of water. And to convert all that water to steam takes a huge amount of energy. It actually takes about 5.5 times more energy to convert that water to steam than it did to make that water go from freezing to boiling, right? So hence the 12 hours. And I think that organizational transformation is very similar. You think you're close, but you're actually nowhere near there. And the reason why, so in water's case, we have these little bonds. I can't remember the name of the bonds, but the water molecules like to hang together, right? They like to be together. And there's a lot of energy required to break them up enough to float them off as steam and make them a gas. And in much the same way for organizational transformation, there are a lot of systems factors that are embedded, right? There's a lot of interactions and structures and processes and knowledge and tools and so much that's together. And you have to break it to put it back together in a new way. And that takes a lot more effort and energy than you would think. So hence my little maple syrup story. Yes, you could make a lot of pancakes in 12 hours, Lee. That is true. All right, so I hope that helped. And I hope you can keep that in mind, right? Transformation takes significantly longer to truly stick and last than you might think, especially in the early days, weeks, or months, when you think, hey, we're looking good. Think about that boiling sap. You're just starting, okay? Yeah, and actually, this is, I took this picture this morning. This was syrup from last year. I'm going to go out and tap the trees this weekend. It's the right time of year for it. So if you have maple trees, go to the Beechwood Farms thing, because they gave us a couple of little spiles to collect the sap, and you could do their tour and get some taps and make some syrup. It's quite fun. All right, let's move on. So I know we have like 10 minutes left, so I'm going to zip through some stuff. So back to change management and project management, right? And let's tie these things together a little bit. So I actually had the pleasure of serving in Deb's position about 10 years ago. And I remember running a poll of our members at a session. I think this was actually in the room at the ESWP, of like, what kind of topics are you interested in? What do you want to hear about, all you project management people? And managing change was the biggest response at that time. So this topic has been around for at least since then, and we know it's been around for a lot longer than that. And in fact, a few years, 6 years before that, I was at, I think, my second PMI leadership meeting that was in Seattle. And I think it was Jeff Hyatt, I think the author of the ADKAR book, that came out in, like, that book came out in January 2006. And I can't find it on my bookshelf. I don't know where it went. I have the newer book, the second edition of Change Management by Hyatt and Creasy. I actually have two of those because I lost one and I found it back. But anyway, I was introduced to ADKAR back in 2006 at a PMI big, global event, the North American Congress. And it captured my attention immediately. I thought it was a fantastic model to, especially, and I'm going to do it disservice here because we've covered ADKAR before. I think I actually did a session a bit over a year ago, talked about ADKAR and talked about some other things. But in summary, as Conrad said, what often happens in a lot of cases is that organizations and project teams and leaders want to skip over these first two critical elements, right? We skip over people's awareness of the need for the change, that sort of inspiring sense of this is an important thing, and the desire for someone, for me, you, for those practitioners particularly, and the change team, to be a part of it, right? To help it succeed. If you ignore that, if you skip it, and you just simply move into knowledge and say, well, I'm going to tell you what you need to know about the new thing, the new world, the new system, the new whatever, you've lost the intrinsic motivation that people have, and you will struggle and you'll likely fail. So ADKAR has shown itself to be a really useful model. And again, of course, there's making sure people don't just know knowledge, book knowledge, if you will, but they have proven ability. They've been coached, they've been supported, they've been given feedback, they're able to do whatever the new thing is or use the new tool. And again, back to this topic of reinforcement, which I think doesn't get anywhere near enough attention, is what are the characteristics of the system that need to change as well so that people can change easily? And we're going to get to a point about that momentarily. So again, change and project management have been going hand in hand for a long time. This was back 16 years ago. And I'm sure there's one of the things I've respected a lot through all my years of involvement with PMI is this ability to go and seek and discover and illustrate and share knowledge, tools, techniques, whatever it might be, that helps us be more effective and successful in helping our organizations achieve those outcomes, right? So we really are, I mean, you think of it, I think of myself as a change agent. I think of myself as, you know, maybe I don't think of myself as a project manager so much anymore because of all these other things that come into play, but that ability to deliver a new result, a new state, is really important. And I think that's true of all project managers. So this next one I completely lifted from the Stanford Change Management as a quick and simple illustration of why, right? Why do we care? And it comes back to what we were talking earlier about the people side of change. And if you ignore that, your ability to achieve those benefits, to achieve an improved future state of performance for the organization is severely limited. And in fact, you can play with this conceptual diagram. Like, one thing to be mindful of is often this here where it says current state and then here change implemented. A lot of project management, at least what I might call maybe less experienced project managers, or project managers who maybe aren't that interested in influencing organizational performance, they just want to build the widget that was asked for in the charter. That space is really here, right? That change implemented, this milestone marker, if you will. The project is back here, right? The development, design, whatever it was, implementation, boom, you know, go live if it's a system or something like that. And then all of a sudden, oh, now you need to adopt the new system. So without change management, without that upfront and early, you know, way back here, identification of stakeholders, addressing and hearing their needs and so on, they're going to drop precipitously in performance. And they may or may not even get back to the original state, right? Back to Ed's point, it's certainly possible. Organizations have gone into, you know, or I don't know what you'd call it, but, you know, a bad state of too much change, too little effective change management, too little management of adoption and motivation, and effectively made themselves perform poorly. So yeah, regression. Thank you, Danielle. As opposed to, of course, you know, the promise here is that you will achieve a better state of performance, like my daughter with her new better dives, because she learned a new technique for launching off the board. So that's kind of the promise here. So I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes on a couple of these characteristics of systems factors and make sure we leave a couple of minutes for questions. So this next one is busy, but hopefully we can work through it. This slide, so it blends a couple of things. One, Deming said at some point, or at least this is attributed to him, that 94% of the problems in an organization are caused by the system, right? And what do we mean by the system? So I'm going to answer, here's my version of what I would think of as the system, or at least characteristics or attributes of the system that you can see and influence and actually improve those system characteristics. And that will have a positive effect for anything else you're trying to do to help your organization be productive and effective. Firstly, of course, is purposeful leadership. It is probably, in my opinion, the most important thing. That if you have purposeful leadership that is focused on the needs of the organization, the needs of customers, the needs of employees, you know, other needs, you know, maybe needs of stakeholders and so on, then that makes a huge difference. Another is an organization that embeds and practices continual improvement, that has practices of outcome measurement. So we talked a little bit about value realization earlier. So that can be really important. That looks at the structure and culture of the organization. So what are how are those characteristics influencing the work you're doing, whether it's just regular operations or whether it's relating to change. Engaging with stakeholders, and I mentioned a number of them just now. Making sure you have clear roles and responsibilities. People should know and be able to see and address, what am I supposed to be doing? What role do I play? What responsibilities do I have? And is that clear, right? Are people competent? Now, it's not trying to be mean to anyone, but how do you ensure and assure and support people being competent at the work they're trying to do and the roles they're trying to fulfill? How do you invest in process, in the assets for processes, in the management of processes? How do you do that as an organization so that, again, there's clarity of what's the expectation, what needs to be done, what follows what connects to what, those kinds of things. What about verification governance? Things like audit, compliance, controls. Like, are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? And are we achieving what we're supposed to be achieving? And are we in line with regulatory constraints, et cetera, et cetera? You've got to be investing in that space. Do we have effective resources? It could be knowledge resources, it could be people, it could be time. There's a whole bunch of things in terms of resources. And then I think the last one I have here is technology, right? How are we applying technology? Now, I have these in an order, and the order is essentially this, that you can typically acquire resources and or acquire technology fairly easily, relatively simply. However, it's pretty tough over here to significantly change your capability of purposeful leadership as an organization. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave that as kind of the last talking point slide for this session. But I hope you can see that any one of these organizational factors can and does have an influence on your ability to lead and deliver effective projects and organizational change, right? And so there's an opportunity, and I've said this to a number of my clients, to think about these and not trying to address all of these at once, because that itself would be a mistake. But where is there the greatest potential for you to have an influence and improve one of these domains a little to have a significant leverage effect on everything else you're doing as an organization? Okay. So with that, I'm going to jump to my ending slide. All right. So we talked a little bit about at the early stage, right? Understand where you are. So that ability to run an assessment to sort of know where are we, and then where are we trying to go? What's our future? Who are our partners? Who's on board with us here? And how do we commit to the change we're trying to make, right? And then get going, right? Take action. Don't try and overcomplicate it. Then learn through that and adapt from your learning. Make sure you celebrate success. Make sure that's very visible. Make people feel good about being part of any change that you're doing, and continue to communicate and make sure that communication is not just broadcasting, but a lot of listening and understanding as well. So with that, I know we're right on time, but if anyone has questions, thank you for the opportunity for this session as well. And I just want to also say congratulations to our new PMI Pittsburgh board members. Look forward to more great stuff. So
Thank you. Yeah, I don't see any more questions in the chat, but if anyone does have a question, feel free. We'll get these slides out and the recording out along with some instructions on how to self-report your PDUs.
Thank you, Lou.
Okay. Or Deb.
Change control boards. They can be, Lindsay. Can I take a couple of minutes to answer questions? Deb, is that
absolutely. Okay? Go for it.
They can be, Lindsay. I'll talk about change control boards in brief. I have seen good ones and not so good ones. The not so good ones I have found are ones that are very rigid and, kind of more of that, what a lot of people have a beef about traditional project management, which is that kind of rigid scope lock-in. And the change control board is essentially the sort of, you can come here and ask for something and we're going to knock it back because it doesn't fit within our definition of what scope was a year ago. So that can, essentially be a very maladaptive change control board. However, a change control board that is open to influence, that is very clear on the mission of the change, the vision, if you will, the achievement of business value and positive change and benefit for the stakeholders, whether those stakeholders are customers or employees or whomever they are, then they can be highly effective. And especially if that change control board has representation from the domains that can be most influential. So maybe that's different lines of business, but also from different professions. Such as the change management profession, such as perhaps business architecture, such as risk, etc. So in that case, they can be very effective at periodically, like as I said about the BCD DICE model, every couple of months, perhaps having a good, proper, solid review of like, where are we? What have we learned? Are we on track to meet our objective? Not on track to, replicate the plan, but to achieve the outcome that we're seeking. Okay. Thanks, Lindsay. Thank you, Danielle. Awesome. Ed, yes, that's a good point. Yes, leaders do need to give the money to it. That's actually, I'll tell you one other little interesting approach that I was actually doing some work with a large automotive manufacturer, and they were investing a significant amount, like tens of millions more in switching their mode of investing in projects, and instead essentially funding products and product lines and wrapping the budget for initiatives to improve or change within those product budgets, so that you weren't continually turning off and on different sort of ad hoc project teams, so you could have more stability of team members and more product-centric experience of those people to understand the product and its value in the marketplace and the customers, and allow those people to both continue developing the product and continue providing support. So they essentially, and there's actually a book on it back there somewhere, but Projects to Products is the book. It's a pretty interesting read. So. Good, thanks, Ed. Well, I don't want to go too much over. Is there any other questions that I missed? PMI has a new Agile certification. Improving organizational value. That's good. Thanks, Dwayne.
Dwayne,
Appreciate
have you registered for that? I just registered, but I haven't started it yet. Have you tried it? Have you? Well, I can be the guinea pig, and I'll let you all know how it goes.
Oh, what am I reading now? Thanks, Danielle. I'm actually, this is a Conrad suggestion. I'm reading, Conrad, what's that called now? I've got it on my phone. I'm listening. I'm a big Audible fan. There's a really interesting book by the guy who's the CEO of Bridgewater called, here it is, The Changing World Order. He talks a whole lot about like market cycles and influences on market performance and performance of countries, and that's fascinating. Thank you, Conrad, for that recommendation.
Ray Dalio, great book.
Yeah, Ray Dalio. Yeah. So very good. One other side thing is that the question about the book. One I really enjoyed on the topic of change, so I'll share that with you. I recommend it. Is there's a book by a fellow called Peter Bregman called "You Can Change Other People." And that one, on the level of like talking about individual change and influence, is a really interesting read. So I can recommend that one. So, all right, folks. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you again. Thank you, Deb, for inviting me. And thank you, everyone, for your involvement and questions. I appreciate it. Makes it more fun. And I look forward to another session sometime in the future.
Yes, I thank you all, Conrad, Matt, all the other change management professional group team that was able to join us, and we look forward to working together again in the future. And we all have a lot of homework.
Oh, that's a good point. Actually, I was going to say, we have a sort of a handshake, head nod agreement on like just generally being collaborators, as you know, the PMI gang and the change management gang. Again, there's a lot of synergy there in the domain. So you know, at least from a change management perspective, it's free for everyone. There's no skin off your nose, and there's no stealing from PMI. So it's great to have the collaboration. So thanks, folks.
Excellent. All right.
All right.
Thanks,
Good night,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.